Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I take this time as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to bring to my colleagues' attention a very disturbing trend that has taken place on us carrying out our constitutional responsibilities. It's up to the United States Senate and only the United States Senate to confirm, advise, and consent appointments by the President of the United States that requires the confirmation of the United States Senate. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which I am honored to serve on and to act as the ranking Democrat, has acted, I think, in a very responsible manner in scheduling hearings and taking action on the nominations that have been submitted by President Obama. And I want to thank Senator Corker. He has scheduled these hearings, I think, in a very timely way and scheduled markups in our committee so that we can make our recommendations to the full Senate. But, Mr. President, that's not true of the Senate as a body. There are currently 16 highly qualified nominees that have been recommended for Senate confirmation, none of which are controversial, that are awaiting action on the floor of the United States Senate. Some of these nominees have been waiting as long as 10 months, almost a year, for action by the United States Senate. And let me repeat this. Not one of these nominees are being held up because of challenges to his or her qualifications to assume the responsibility of the positions in which that person has been nominated. In each of these cases, they have cleared the committee hurdle by unanimous or near unanimous votes in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So why have we not taken these nominees up for confirmation votes on the floor of the United States Senate? They're not controversial. They're qualified for the positions. The reason, Mr. President, is that in each case, a senator has placed a hold on the consideration of that nominee. Now, what does a hold mean? It means that a senator has let their respective caucus know that they will not consent to the nomination coming before the Senate, either as a unanimous consent request or for a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. That's been the prerogatives of members of the Senate. They can do that. Now, the way you overcome that is either the senator reduces or eliminates their hold, and in these cases, each one of these holds have nothing to do with the qualifications of the individual for this position. Or the majority leader, Senator McConnell, brings forward the nomination, if necessary, uses a cloture motion in order to get this issue resolved. After all, one senator shouldn't be able to stop a nomination on the floor of the United States Senate from carrying out our responsibilities of advise and consent. Senator McConnell has been unwilling to do that. I understand the challenges of floor time. I fully do. 10 months, some of these nominees have been waiting. And these are critical missions for our Foreign Service. The reasons why these individuals are being held, let me just give you an example. It's because of a member being upset with the Obama administration taking the Iran agreement to the United Nations for a vote before action in the United States Senate, having nothing to do with the nominee that we're talking about. Or concerns about Secretary Clinton, or concerns about the Secret Service, but not related to the person who was nominated for the position that we're talking about. Mr. President, that's just wrong. We have the constitutional responsibility to advise and consent on presidential appointments. So let me just give you some, for examples, to fall into this category of the 16 nominees that are currently waiting for Senate confirmation. We have the Assistant Secretary of State for Conflict and Stabilization Operations. Person who has been nominated for that is Ambassador David Robinson, a career diplomat, 30 years of public service. He has held the Principal Deputy High Representative in Bosnia-Herzegovina, one of the most difficult conflict areas in modern times. He has served both Democratic and Republican administrations. He's a career diplomat. The position we are talking about focuses on prevention and response to mass atrocities and countering violent extremism and election-related violence. I would think that's a high priority for this Senate, to make sure the United States have all hands on deck to deal with these types of international challenges. Ambassador Robinson has served far and wide under dangerous and demanding circumstances. He was the Assistant Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. He has served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration. He has served as the U.S. Ambassador to Guyana from 2006 to 2008, and as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown, Guyana from 2003 to 2006. He also serves as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Paraguay from 2000 to 2003. Mr. President, this is a highly qualified individual who has shown a clear commitment and dedication to serving his country. He's been waiting almost 7 months for the United States Senate to act on his nomination. Let me cite another example. The State Department's legal advisor, Brian Egan. He has served both Republican and Democratic administrations. This is a critical mission, the legal advisor. Just today, in a hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where we had General Allen, and the discussion ensued as to the legal authority that we have in regards to some of our activities. It'd be good to have a confirmed legal advisor so that we can get those types of answers. Like Ambassador Robinson, Mr. Egan has served in both Democratic and Republican administrations. He began his career as a government lawyer in 2005, as a civil servant in the Office of the Legal Advisor of the State Department, which was headed at the time by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He has worked in the private sector. He has served as Assistant General Counsel for Enforcement and Intelligence at the Treasury Department. He has served on the National Security Council staff. Mr. President, this is a nonpartisan and fair-minded individual who clearly has the skill and ability to lead the Office of Legal Advisor at the State Department. He's been waiting 9 months for confirmation. 9 months. A person who has devoted his career to public service. That's no way to treat people who want to give their service to this country in important roles. We need to carry out our responsibility. At the USAID, the administrator position has not been confirmed. The Assistant USAID Administrator for Europe and Eurasia has not been confirmed. The Inspector General of the USAID has not been confirmed. These appointments have been here for some time. And Mr. President, I've listened to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle talk about the refugee crisis. We have approaching the number of people who are dislocated in this world similar to what we had at the end of World War II. Well, the principal agency that deals with this crisis in the United States is the USAID. We know we have conflict areas all over the world. And we've heard over and over again that the way that we deal with this, one of our major tools, is through development assistance. We need confirmed top management at this agency. And the United States Senate has an obligation to act. In each of these cases, none of these nominees are controversial. I want to repeat that. They're not being held by a senator because of anything to do with their qualifications for the position in which they've been nominated for. They're unrelated issues. For a long period of time, compromising the critical missions of these agencies. Just as tragically, there are 20 innocent USAID Foreign Service Officers who have been held up. These 20 USAID Foreign Service Officers are not nominated for ambassador positions or assistant secretary positions. These are folks that were plucked from a list of 181 promotions that must be confirmed by the full Senate for the promotions to take effect. In other words, their promotions have been denied taking effect because of an individual hold by a senator for reasons unrelated to their performance in office. Career diplomats, civil servants. These are civil servants who are working hard day in and day out serving their country in both Democratic and Republican administrations. They're not involved in the politics of the United States Senate, and yet they're the casualties of this politics. In challenging and sometimes very dangerous places, these individuals are called upon to serve. We are talking about a supervisor program officer in Cambodia, the deputy director of East Africa operations in Kenya, the director of democracy and governance office in Rwanda, a senior advisor for the civilian-military cooperation, a resident legal officer for the regional mission for Asia, an education officer in Honduras, a regional legal advisor in El Salvador, a deputy controller for financial management in El Salvador, a regional food for peace officer in Ethiopia, a regional legal advisor in Egypt, a deputy education and youth officer director in Kenya, the director of the Food for Peace program in South Sudan, the democracy and governance director in El Salvador, the economic growth team leader in Zimbabwe, the economic growth officer director in Ukraine, and the controller for financial management in Rwanda. Now, I went through that list because I think everyone would acknowledge these are people serving in very dangerous places. Mr. President, we had a hearing, as I mentioned, in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and General Allen, who's doing an incredible public service for our representative in the Middle East, said that he wanted to thank the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for the attention that we have given to our diplomats. Often on the floor of the Senate, you hear glowing thanks, and I join in those thanks to the men and women who've worn the uniform of our nation to defend our freedom. Well, our thanks go equally to our foreign service officers who serve in very dangerous positions in order to advance the U.S. principles of democracy and human rights. And we know about the casualties that we have suffered in that regard. Well, these individuals are entitled to promotion. It requires our action. And to hold up their promotions for reasons unrelated to their job performance is just plain irresponsible. And we need to take up these nominees. There are ambassadorships that have been open for way, way too long, Mr. President. I can mention many of the ambassadorships. I'll just mention two: Sweden and Trinidad and Tobago. Sweden, which of course is a strategic ally, an Arctic Council member, Azita Raji, has been nominated. She is a career diplomat. She is a businesswoman who has been the vice president of J.P. Morgan Securities. She's not a career diplomat. She's a person who brings her unique expertise from the business sector to help one of our critical ambassador positions. Again, a non-controversial nominee who's been held up 10 months. 10 months. Sweden, critical partner for the United States. In Trinidad and Tobago, John Estrada has been waiting 180 days for his confirmation. Trinidad is a critical place for the United States in our drug smuggling activities that bring drugs into the United States. We need a confirmed ambassador to lead that fight against drug smuggling into the United States. Again, being held up for reasons unrelated to his own qualifications. So, Mr. President, I could go through all the 16 nominees. I think I've made my point. My point is this. I think the public would be surprised to learn that one senator can block a nomination of a president, and that is used many times unrelated to the qualifications of that individual for the position in which he or she has been nominated. It's happened here numerous times, as I've just pointed out. And I think it's the responsibility of the Senate to say enough's enough. It's time for us to act on these nominees so they can continue their public service in a confirmed position to help us on our war against drugs, to help us in our international diplomacy, to help us in development assistance in order to resolve conflicts, to provide the very best legal advice to make sure that what we are doing is consistent with our Constitution, to do the services of the people, for the people of this country, we got to do our service here in the United States Senate. And that is to take up and vote on the president's nominees to these critical foreign policy positions. So I urge my colleagues to allow us to bring these nominees up for vote, so we can carry out our responsibility, so these people can carry out their critically important missions to the security interests of the United States. And with that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.